Salve. Welcome, brother. My name is Brent. I am a real Freemason, and this is Stone, Iron, and Oak. I want to thank my viewers for driving me in the direction of this topic. It's brought up quite often in the comments and elsewhere in anti-Masonic rhetoric. People ask me how I view my Masonic oaths in relation to my faith. This video addresses that. This is a subject where I will delve into certain religious aspects and want to clearly note that in Masonry, every man's faith is his own, as well as his opinion. Each man has his right to accept or reject whatever he feels is unwise or unsound. I speak only for myself, and never for any jurisdiction or other body. One of the most often cited anti-Masonic talking points is the oath. Even before the formation of the United Grand Lodge of England in 1717, swearing oaths in secret was heralded as proof of evil intentions on the part of Freemasons. In 1698, a leaflet was published leveling two charges against the craft. First, the members swear oaths, and presumably to support each other. And second, that Freemasons are meters in secret, which is the way of evildoers. It read, "To all godly people in the city of London, having thought it needful to warn you of the mischiefs and evil practiced in the sight of God by those called Freemasons, I say take care lest their ceremonies and secret swearings take hold of you, and be wary that none cause you to err from godliness. For this devilish sect of men are meters in secret, which are swear against all without their following. They are the Antichrist, which has come to leading men from fear of God. For how should men meet in secret places, and with secret signs, taking care that none observe them to do the work of God? And are not these the ways of evildoers? Knowing how that God observeth privily them that sit in darkness, they shall be smitten, and their secrets of their hearts laid bare. Mingle not among this corrupt people, lest you be found so at the world's conflagration." This position appears also to be backed up by New Testament scripture with respect to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5:34. "But I say unto you, swear not at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne." And James 5:12, "Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven or by earth or by anything else. All you need is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned." Why have oaths, and especially Masonic oaths, been treated with such suspicion for centuries? Let's step back to the source, because this controversy didn't begin with Freemasonry. It began with Scripture. Matthew 5:34 reads, "But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is his footstool." This sounds absolute at face value. If Jesus said not to swear, why do courts, ministers, and presidents still take oaths? Because in first century Judea, oaths weren't about secret handshakes. They were about power, piety, and loopholes. In historical context for the Sermon on the Mount, you have to put yourself into the religious and social world of the day, where Pharisees and scribes had developed a whole system of oath-taking, one that Jesus was directly critiquing. In first century Judea, oaths were everywhere, in contracts, temple offerings, and even in daily conversation. Oaths were meant to invoke God as a witness to truth. "By the Lord I swear." But by Jesus' time, a complicated hierarchy of oaths had evolved, mainly through Pharisaic casuistry, which is fine-grained legal reasoning. Essentially, they were lawyering. Rabbinic and Pharisaic teachers tried to determine which oaths were binding and which weren't. Swearing by God was binding. Swearing by heaven or by earth or by Jerusalem might not be. Swearing by my head or by the temple might count, but only partially. My favorite example of this is in Matthew 23:15 through 17, where Jesus said, "Woe unto you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Woe to you, blind guides! You say, if anyone swears by the temple, it means nothing. But anyone who swears by the gold of the temple is bound by that oath. You blind fools, which is greater, the gold or the temple that makes it sacred. This casuistry created a moral loophole culture, which is a fancy way of saying a pious-sounding way to lie. You could sound devout while actually crafting an escape clause. Jesus explicitly targets this in Matthew 23. He calls this reasoning blind and hypocritical. To the Pharisaic teachers, the oath systems were part of their authority structure. They set the rules on what was binding. Oaths were a visible expression of piety and orthodoxy. By condemning the system itself, Jesus wasn't just moralizing. He was undermining the religious credibility economy of the day. It's one of many instances where he bypasses institutional gatekeeping to call people back to direct integrity before God. In plain terms, Jesus was speaking directly to the establishment, telling them not to game the truth, that all creation belongs to God, so don't use it to manipulate the truth, and live with integrity so that oaths aren't necessary. But that's in a perfect world. But this isn't a perfect world. Given the circumstances of the day, this puts context around what Jesus was preaching when he said these words. So if Jesus wasn't banning every oath, then how did Christian thinkers make sense of it over all the centuries? The church's basis for accepting some oaths has scriptural precedent. In Hebrews 6:13, God himself swears oaths. Paul invokes God as a witness in 2 Corinthians 1:23 and in Galatians 1:20. These passages suggested to most Christian theologians that Jesus was not issuing a blanket ban, and many theologians and church fathers have noted that oaths are lawful. St. Augustine was much more of the RoboCop of interpretations, a strict reading to avoid oaths except in very specific circumstances, and certainly no casual oaths. He believed that oaths indicated a lack of trustworthiness because one's word was insufficient. St. Thomas Aquinas' approach is grounded in natural law and reason. His main teaching is that oaths are morally permissible. He saw that oaths are allowable in certain situations, particularly when truth-telling must be solemnly attested. He developed three main rules. First, that conditions for a valid oath must be satisfied. It must be made for a moral cause. It must be sworn truthfully, and that God's name should be invoked appropriately, acknowledging his authority. Second, oaths are binding because of God. The solemnity of invoking God adds moral weight. Breaking an oath is sinful because it dishonors God. And third, that not all oaths are necessary. Casual or frivolous oaths are wrong, echoing Augustine's caution. Oaths should aim at justice, truth, and the good of society. Aquinas integrates divine law, natural law, and social utility. While he allows oaths more freely than Augustine, he insists that moral seriousness and proper context be observed. However, there is considerable gray area for interpreting his notion of what is casual or frivolous. Luther was more relaxed and saw them as legitimate in civil life, but should be avoided in casual speech. John Calvin was even more broad in noting that oaths are an act of worship, since invoking God is calling him as a witness to the truth. Therefore, misuse of oaths is a form of profanity. This comes with the caveat that the oath must be solemn, not deceptive, and directed to God. The consensus was more a matter of integrity over legalism. However, even in 2 Corinthians 1:23, Paul said, "I call God as my witness. I stake my life on it that it was in order to spare you that I did not return to Corinth." So if oaths have a long and respectable place in Christian tradition, why the outrage when Freemasons use them? There are oaths for everything. An oath of office, an oath of citizenship, the Hippocratic oath, oath of allegiance, military oath, judicial oath, and professional oaths. That isn't to say that there aren't Christian sects which eschew oaths entirely. Anabaptists and Quakers reject all oaths, even in courts. However, most Christians accept oaths when they serve truth and justice. If we zoom out, oaths are as old as civilization itself. Long before lawyers drafted contracts, people bound their word with something far more sacred: their honor and their gods. In the ancient world, an oath was not just a promise. It was a form of divine self-curse. You swore before your God or gods that what you said was true. And if you lied, may that same deity destroy you. To the ancients, words carried power. To swear falsely wasn't just deceitful, it was dangerous. In the Old Testament, we see oaths everywhere. Abraham and Abimelech swore peace over a well in Genesis 21. David swore loyalty to Jonathan, and Jonathan to him in 1 Samuel 20. God himself swears by his own name in Genesis 22 and Hebrews 6, because he could swear by no one greater. He swore by himself. For the Israelites, an oath invoked Yahweh as a witness. To swear falsely was to take the Lord's name in vain, literally violating the second commandment. That's why Jesus' Sermon on the Mount hit so hard. He was calling out a culture that had turned a sacred act of oath-taking into a casual loophole game. In ancient Greece, oaths bound soldiers, merchants, and even philosophers. The Hippocratic oath taken by physicians to this day descends from this tradition. It begins, "I swear by Apollo the physician, by Asclepius, and by all the gods and goddesses." To violate this oath was to invite divine retribution. The Romans institutionalized this idea with their sacramentum, a soldier's oath of allegiance to the republic and later to the emperor. The sacramentum made loyalty sacred. To break it was treason against both Rome and the gods. And interestingly, that's where the Christian word sacrament comes from, something sacred, binding, and unbreakable. Early Christians, however, refused to swear the sacramentum to Caesar because it required declaring that Caesar is Lord. For them, that title belonged to Christ alone, and many were executed not for what they did, but because of what they refused to swear. By the Middle Ages, oaths became the glue of feudal society. Kings swore to uphold justice. Knights swore fealty to their lords. Vassals pledged loyalty on relics and gospels. An oath wasn't just a moral bond. It was the backbone of law and order. Guilds and trade societies also used oaths. A mason, a carpenter, a blacksmith might swear to keep the secrets of their craft, to deal honestly, and to maintain standards of workmanship. These weren't sinister. They were practical. Knowledge was valuable, and trust held communities together long before there was copyright laws. Even the church was built on vows and oaths, vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, each one a sacred promise to God. Medieval theology considered a broken oath to be a mortal sin. Fast forward to the Reformation, and oaths take on new political meaning. In Protestant and Catholic nations alike, rulers demanded oaths of allegiance that tested both faith and loyalty. In England, the oath of supremacy in 1534 forced citizens to acknowledge the monarch and not the Pope as the head of the church. In turn, the Catholic monarchs demanded anti-Protestant loyalty oaths, and to refuse was not just religious dissent, it was treason. This period also birthed the oath refusers, Quakers, Mennonites, and Anabaptists who read Matthew 5 literally. They rejected all oaths, insisting that the truth must be unconditional. Early Baptists and some Puritans followed suit. By the 17th and 18th centuries, as science and reason began challenging divine authority, philosophers questioned whether invoking God was even necessary. The Enlightenment gave rise to the contract, a secular descendant of the oath. It preserved the moral intent, but replaced divine enforcement with civic trust and the rule of law. Yet, even in this rational age, professions still swore oaths to serve, to protect, to heal, to tell the truth. The language softened, but the moral backbone remained, a recognition that one's word is sacred. So when Freemasonry emerged in the early 1700s, its use of solemn obligations wasn't strange or sinister. It was entirely in step with the moral and social fabric of the time. It drew on the same traditions that shaped every honorable profession, guild, and civic office before it. Which brings us to the Masonic oath itself, a continuation of that ancient lineage, but one with a distinctly moral and symbolic purpose. Freemasonry's oaths are moral and symbolic, not political and religious. Modern Masonry extends from the operative Masons who belong to the Stonemasons Guild. These would be sworn on a Bible to bind the member to the rules of the guild or lodge. Secrecy was a necessary element in several areas. The need to protect their professional secrets and to distinguish their work from inferior work. Additionally, there was a strong moral component which emphasized truthfulness and integrity, loyalty and obedience, justice and fairness, chastity and temperance, as well as brotherhood and charity. These were just as important as the secrets of erecting cathedrals because they bound the Mason to professional standards, fair dealing, not taking another man's work unfairly, monetary honesty, and avoiding drunkenness. These are the themes of a speculative Freemason's oaths as well. There is nothing nefarious about these great qualities. As for any penalties, the operative Masons would have imposed fines, expel, or blacklist a man who had violated the obligation. This would cut them off from being able to work and earn wages. To the modern speculative Mason, they are merely symbolic to emphasize the gravity of the endeavor the man is about to undertake. Which raises an interesting question. What's really behind our discomfort with oaths today? In modern society, we no longer have a great deal of need for taking oaths before God on a regular basis. This isn't because we no longer need them, but because of something more basic. We can read and write. The sworn oath has given way to contracts and signatures which memorialize the terms each side must perform. While they don't necessarily invoke God as your witness, the underlying principle is the same. You are making an attestation, a testimony that you will do something. The need to swear by or invoke God was critical to the man who could not read or write because it ensured he was bound before a higher authority since it was a sin to break an oath. Now we have contracts which also bind parties to a higher authority, the courts. One could even argue that the authority of the courts is more certain for justice. The oathbreaker might not be punished in this life for his sin and may be forgiven before he enters heaven. But the courts provide immediate and certain relief for sanctions in the here and now. A key difference here between contracts and oaths is that the oath externalizes conscience and reminds us of what is sacred. Jesus' command wasn't never swear, it was never lie. My Masonic oath is taken before God because it is a moral exercise in keeping that truth alive. To swear falsely is hypocrisy. To swear truthfully with reverence is virtue. Every civilization rests on the strength of its promises, from the ancient Hebrews to modern times. However, an oath is not a chain. It's a compass. When a Mason takes his oath, he isn't binding himself to secrecy. He binds himself to integrity. If you stayed with me this long, I thank you. Please comment down below your thoughts on this topic. Keep it civil, or at least keep it funny, because the comment section of a Masonic video is always Thunderdome. Salve. Welcome, brother. Please like and subscribe to help with the YouTube algorithm, and so that you will be notified the next time we dispense more light.